Hi, this is Andrea, and I'm back again, part 3 of chapter 12 for HIT 210. We're going to start here and keep on going. I'm not sure yet if you'll have a part 4 or not. We'll see how it goes. We're on basic coding guidelines overall, and we'll breeze through this because some of these things I've already talked about. Each ICD-10 CM code consists of 3 to 7 characters. That first character is always a letter. They use all letters except for U, so watch out for I's that look like ones. Watch out for L's. Watch out for O's, the letter O, that looks like a 0. So be careful. Got to keep your eyes peeled for some of those things. Second character is always a number, and usually third character is too. But characters 3 through 7 can be either a letter or a number. The decimal is always placed after that third character, so remember that. If you have a fourth character, you need that decimal, that period, right after the third character. If you just have 3 characters, you don't have to worry about that decimal, but otherwise you do. Okay, so the first 3 characters identify the category, then the next 3 look at the etiology, anatomic site, or severity, and then the 7th character always has to be the 7th and final character of the code. So let's say you come up with five characters and you need that 7th digit. The 6th place becomes a placeholder of X, and that's when you use it. So X is used as a placeholder when no character exists for any of the second 3 characters of a code, so you can get to 7. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. Let's move to the next one. Okay, excludes 1 and excludes 2. We kind of talked about this when I was walking you through with a online coder from the CDC. Excludes 1s means you don't code it together. The patient cannot have both. So you can't have acquired German measles and also have had congenital German measles or rubella. So there are 2 things that can't exist at the same time, medically speaking. So that's an excludes 1. So if you see excludes 1, you can't do that. Excludes 2 means it's okay to code them together if the patient has both. The odds are the patient will not have both, but it is possible that they could. And if they do have both, then you can code both. So that's what excludes 2 means. So you just need to be aware of those definitions because when you're going to, in the tabular, when you're working in the tabular and you see that, you need to know if it's excludes 1, don't code those together. If it's excludes 2, you can code them together if the patient truly, truly, truly has both. Odds are they won't, but they could potentially do it. And if that case, an excludes 2 means you can code it. Next one, these are some FYIs. If you see the term and, it means and or when it appears in a code title. So when you see the word and, it can mean and or. The term with means associated with or due to when it's in a code title. And just, so for instance, we had otitis media with perforated left eardrum. That means associated with or due to or happens at the same time as, that type of thing. So that's where you see the with. And trying to think of a good and. There's one later that I was going to cover, bilateral mixed conductive and sensorineural deafness. That code is H90.6, and that code includes both. It has and in it, mixed conductive and sensorineural deafness bilaterally. And that brings us to the next one. If there is no bilateral code provided in the tabular and the condition is bilateral, you will need to code both left and right, meaning you'll have 2 codes. So for the most part, they have a bilateral code, but there are some odd ones where they don't have a bilateral code and you're going to have to remember to code both left and right. And that's kind of common sense. So if you can't find a code that covers both left and right, then code both left and right. If a side is not specified, then use the code for unspecified side. You can't guess whether it's left or right. You could try and track down the provider and get them to add whether it's left or right so that you can code it properly, which would be ideal. But if they don't specify it and you have to get it coded, you're going to have to use a code for unspecified side. Underdosing means taking less of a medication than prescribed by a provider or by the manufacturer's instructions with a resulting negative health consequence. So let's say you've got a patient who comes in with really high blood pressure. Now, they do have hypertension on a regular basis, but in the course of talking to them, you find out that the price for their hypertension medication has gone up, and they're actually taking maybe half a dose instead of the full dose of what they were supposed to be doing, and as a result, their blood pressure has kind of gotten out of control again. That's an example of underdosing. So just keep that in mind. That definition in case you see that. Corrosion means burns due to chemicals. So if you are going to code and someone has a burn on their arm due to a chemical, or burn on a finger or that sort of thing, and it's due to a chemical, keep in mind the terminology that you want to use is corrosion. And that means burns due to chemicals. And then the following terms are considered equivalent to intractable. Think about intractable, sorry, my tongue is tied. Intractable vomiting or intractable migraine headache. Those types of things. Intractable means it's drug resistant, treatment resistant, medically refractory, and poorly controlled. So if your provider documents that their vomiting is treatment resistant, let's say, or medically refractory, when you go to code, you're going to use the term intractable to mean medically refractory, treatment resistant, drug resistant, pharmacoresistant, or poorly controlled. So hopefully that clarifies that. Moving on. Okay, combination codes. There are some combination codes that are created that put things together, which is helpful because then you have one code that includes it. A good example is the middle one here, I25.110, atherosclerotic heart disease with unstable angina. You don't code them separately because there is a combination code, because it's a common condition with that manifestation. Another example would be K50.112, Crohn's disease with intestinal obstruction. At the beginning, it was E10.21, type 1 diabetes with diabetic nephropathy. So those are combination codes, and you just kind of need to watch out for those because you don't want to code, for instance, giving you the example of the acute otitis media with perforated left eardrum. I could have coded H66.92 and H72.92, but that would be incorrect because there is a combination code, H66.012, that includes both. So that's an example of a combination code. There are also combination codes for poisonings and external causes. Example in your drugs and chemicals table. You can have poisoning by penicillins, accidental, non-intentional, and that will code out to T36.0x1. And you will have that seventh character. In this case, it's subsequent encounter, so there's a D there. And another example is adverse effects of benzos, initial encounter, T42.4x5A, because A is going to be that seventh character. So there are combination codes when you get to the point of looking at poisonings, drugs, chemicals, and external causes. So that's just an FYI. There are codes that include laterality. We found that out with the otitis media, acute otitis media with perforated left eardrum. These are two examples where the codes include laterality. Swimmer's ear in the left ear is H60.332. Chondromalacia in the right shoulder is M94.211. You don't have to have unspecified if you've got the specification for the laterality in your documentation and you've got the code for it. So just be aware that this is another really good reason why you don't code from the index, you go to the tabular, is because sometimes when you get to the tabular you find out, oh, there's codes for laterality, and you can pick them up there in the tabular. Episode of care is indicated by the 7th character. I kind of talked about that. Whether it's an initial encounter, and that is going to be the character A, whether it's going to be a subsequent encounter, that is the letter D, or whether it's going to be because of a sequela. Oftentimes you'll see with strokes, people have sequela. They have weakness that remains after the stroke that is permanent, or they might have some paralysis, or they might have some dysphagia, which means difficulty swallowing, or they might have some dysphagia, which is difficulty speaking. Those are sequela. They happen at an acute event, and they remain with the patient long term. And so when the patient comes in for a future episode of care and they've got that sequela going on and you code, that 7th character is going to be an S for sequela, or an A because it's initial encounter, or a D because it's a subsequent encounter. So hopefully that makes sense. Then obstetric codes include trimester. So be aware, obstetric codes include the trimester, and you'll need to know that where those break down. And if you go to the obstetric codes, they'll walk you through it. That's not a problem. And when we cover obstetric codes, which we will briefly, it'll also cover that. So examples of obstetric codes. Somebody obviously had a great sense of humor because all the obstetric codes start with O. So just be careful. So this first one is O, the letter O, 10.012, pre-existing essential hypertension complicating pregnancy in the 2nd trimester. Another example, O, the letter O, 99.013, anemia complicating pregnancy in the 3rd trimester. So just watch out for those when you're dealing with obstetric codes. Make sure, again, you don't code from the index. You go to that tabular, because those codes will be broken down by trimester. And you'll want to make sure that if you're working for an OBGYN group, that they are good about documenting which trimester the patient is in, so that you have that when you're ready to code. Watch out for time frames. ICD-10-CM has different time frames. An example is acute myocardial infarction, heart attack, AMI. It's in the acute phase for 4 weeks or less now. A long time ago, it used to be 8 weeks. Now it's 4 weeks. You're only considered to have an acute myocardial infarction for the first 4 weeks. After that, it's no longer acute. And with abortion or miscarriage or fetal death, it's 20 weeks. That line is 20 weeks. So before 20 weeks, it's going to be an abortion or a miscarriage. After 20 weeks, it's considered a fetal death. And that's the terminology that's used in that chapter. We're at about 13.5 minutes. And so I'm going to end this video. This is now part 3. And I will be back momentarily and we will get started on part 4. So don't go away.